Thanks, Robin. Rob will be around to answer questions later. Super interesting about the lake stuff. I think about Portage Lake and other lakes that we don't really think about with landslides, but now I do. Next up, we have Habitat Association of Kelp with Ben Wilkins. He's the program coordinator for the FAST Lab, Fisheries, Aquatic Science and Technology, and a diving safety officer with his diving class here, and adjunct faculty at Alaska Pacific University, and just a great guy. So, Ben.
Well, thanks, Paul. Appreciate it. So as Paul mentioned, I'm going to be talking about habitat distribution of kelp species in Prince William Sound. And I only have 15 minutes, and there's a lot of kelp out there, guys. Spoiler alert. So this was basically, so this was actually a project that I've been doing for the last 5 years in conjunction with Fish and Game. Those of you who caught my speech last year, it was about sea cucumbers, and the data in this is from that study. Cool. So Prince William Sound, there are some unique characteristics to Prince William Sound that have direct correlation with our kelp species that we find here. First off, there's between 3,500 and 3,800 miles of coastline in Prince William Sound, which is more coastline than the northeast coast of North America. So a lot of coastline out there. It's nutrient rich. We have a lot of nutrients coming in from the Gulf of Alaska, also coming in through our rivers and streams in Prince William Sound. We have a lot of diverse marine life and the habitat and sediments and things like that. It's just a super diverse place. It's also very dramatic in terms of depth. So those of you who have spent time out there know that it's pretty darn deep. If you look at this figure here, between Cabin and Lone Island, that dark blue area is over 2,000 feet deep. It's some of the deepest inland water in North America. We have highly variable currents, so some areas in Prince William Sound have super high water velocities and currents, and then you have these kind of hidden bays that don't get a ton of wind action and fetch, and not a ton of currents cruising through there. And as I mentioned, we have a lot of fresh water coming into the sound through all of our glaciers and river systems. So now let's talk about kelp. What is kelp? Technically, it's brown algae. A lot of people just call it seaweed as well. Kelp does have chloroplast and goes through photosynthesis for energy. It's a very different evolutionary tree than our plants. And this is known as convergent evolution, when two different things evolve similar mechanisms, but separately. We think that brown algae has been in the Northeast Pacific for around 32 million years, which in the grand scheme of things isn't actually that long. It grows very fast. Some species can grow up to 1.5 meters a day, or 20 inches. Nereocystis, our giant kelp, can grow incredibly fast and can be as tall as 260 feet. A little bit about the anatomy of kelp. Instead of roots, kelp has holdfast. It's basically just an anchor that holds it in place. And it's not absorbing nutrients through there like roots on a plant. Instead, it's just there to hold it where it is. And then you also have the body or frond, which includes stipes, which are basically stems. And then we have blades, which are similar to leaves. And we also have gas bladders or pneumatocysts, which are gas-filled chambers that hold the leaves upright to absorb more sunlight. I always wondered what was inside of those pneumatocysts. Is it air? Is it nitrogen? What is it? And it's basically the same composition as air. It's about 20% oxygen, almost 80% nitrogen, but there's carbon monoxide in there too. So don't let your kids crack them open and sniff them. Okay. So the following figures are just some examples of common kelp we have out in the Sound. All this information and these photos were taken from the Field Guide to Seaweeds of Alaska, which is an incredible book. We use it at Fish and Game for all of our kelp IDs, and Mandy Lindberg and Sandra Lindstrom put that out with help from the Sea Grant, so thank you guys for that. This is fucus. You guys might know it as rockweed or popweed. Very common in the intertidal zone, so you guys might see it just walking around the ocean. They have very pronounced nematocysts, those air-filled sacs, and it's very fun to pop them. But again, don't let your kids inhale that air that comes out. They're yellow-brown. They have a discoidal holdfast, so the thing anchoring it looks kind of like a small ovular disc. They can be about a foot tall, and they're very, very common. We also have ulva. This is also called sea lettuce. It's incredibly bright green, super pretty kelp. It's in the mid to low intertidal, so on a low tide you guys might be able to spot it. Really pretty, fairly rare out in the Sound, which we'll talk about later. It can be up to 2 feet in length. Thanks, Charla. We also have eelgrass, which is not a kelp, but had to throw it in there. This is actually an angiosperm. It is a type of flowering plant, but it does live in our oceans. We do have some vast eelgrass beds out in the Sound, which are incredibly beautiful. These do have roots that absorb nutrients from the sediment. They're usually found in sand and mud in the subtidal zone, so just under where the low tide is. And they're actually related to lilies and palms. After that, we have hair kelp. There's a few hair kelps out in the Sound. I'm not even going to try with those scientific names. But we have witch's hair and golden sea hares out there, usually medium to golden brown, and they also have a discoidal or finely branched holdfast. We have Saccharina latissima, which is our most common kelp. You guys might know this as sugar kelp. Literally everywhere out there, and it's pretty cool. It's really beautiful. It can be up to 16 feet in length. Cylindrical stipe, so the stem on it is round. That's a good way to ID it. Finely branched holdfast, so it almost looks like little roots attaching it to the bottom. And apparently you can make sugar out of it, and it's delicious. We also have Laminaria yezoensis, suction cup kelp. It's often confused for Saccharina. A little more rare out there, medium to dark brown, disc-like holdfast, and the stipe or stem on this one is a little more flattened. So if you find a species that you think might be Saccharina, look at that stipe. If it's round, it's Saccharina. If it's flat, it's going to be Laminaria. This is Agarum. Very common at deeper depths. It's also called sieve kelp or shotgun kelp. Looks like it got blasted by a shotgun. It has a branched holdfast, stiff blade with the holes all over it, and it's commonly up to about 3 feet in length. We also have Alaria, which is ribbon kelp, super rare, really pretty looking. It has a solid midrib, so the stipe goes all the way up through the blade. Light to medium brown, usually find it in the intertidal zone. It can be up to 11 feet in length. Most of what we see is about 5 to 6 feet though. And then finally we have our Nereocystis bull kelp. This is our large canopy forming kelp out in the Sound. The stipe basically ends in one big nematocyst, so one big bulb at the top with that air in it. And then the fronds come right off of that, and they're super pretty. Usually just found in southwestern Prince William Sound where we have a lot of currents delivering those nutrients. Instead of roots, kelp just absorb nutrients from the seawater itself. So they're absorbing nitrogen and phosphates and carbon dioxide right from the water. So they need some water flow. So we went out there. We did a ton of diving out in the Sound, which was amazing. Basically, we had 2 divers doing 2-meter transects side by side. We were out there counting sea cucumbers, looking at kelp species, sediment types, things like that. Basically, we would get a GPS point from the beginning of the dive and from the very end of the dive, and just counting sea cucumbers. And we also took kelp samples for genetic analysis. So we would take mostly the Saccharina, the sugar kelp we were finding, and we'd cut little 1-inch squares and deliver them to Fish and Game here in Anchorage, and they're doing genetic studies. there's some talk of aquaculture happening out there for kelp farms for sugar kelp. So we want to get just a baseline genetic array of what is out there now so that afterwards we can go back and see if the aquaculture happened to change the genetics of that sugar kelp in the sound. So I told you guys that we had our beginning GPS and our end GPS, and we also have our maximum depth. And from that, we're able to use the Pythagorean theorem, which is a method that we developed. And we're able to find a basic estimate of area that we're surveying. And that allows us to get things like densities and stuff like that. So that's kind of a cool thing that we developed. So between 2020 and 2024, we did 424 dives. We collected data every 10 feet, so we call those depth intervals. We had almost 5,000 of those. We spent almost 5,000 minutes underwater, and it was super cool. You can see we got fairly good coverage of the sound. We did another 99 dives in 2025 that I'm still adding to the data set. So maybe I'll present that next year. But this is what it looks like when we have our GPS. That'd be like the little yellow flag is the spot that we're shooting for. And then because of tides and things like that, we start on that little green dot and then we end where the red dot is. We also have dive computers on us, so we can look at things like depth and temperature. So we have all that data as well. We get a nice little benthic map of what's happening on the bottom. So the next two figures were developed by Nike McCampbell. Where are you, Nike? There you are. Good work. Nike was able to take this data set and kind of parse out what was happening with the kelp that we saw out there. So this is in all of our depth intervals. And by far the most common one was the agarum, that sieve kelp. Super common out there, especially deeper depths. The second most common one was our sugar kelp, the saccharina on the top right there in the red. Fucus is in the dark blue. Pretty good showing there. And then we actually had a lot of eelgrass as well in the darker green. Those were our four most common species that we saw out there. So this is a really cool figure that Nike made. This is basically the number of depth intervals that had certain kelp species per bay. So this is an amazing tool if we want to find especially some of those rare species. Say you're looking for Alaria, which is in the purple. You can look through here and see that if you go to Port Fidalgo or Prince of Wales Passage, that's probably your best shot at finding that specific species. So it's an amazing tool. So here are some more graphs, and in green we have our cucumber density. Pay no attention to that. What we are looking at is the red line. So on the x-axis we have our depth intervals, 0 to 10 feet, 10 to 20, etc. And on the right y-axis we have thousands of square meters that we looked at underwater. And this is percent of macroalgal cover, so this is how much of the bottom was covered with kelp. And you can see that we have some interesting things happening. You have 0% as it gets deeper. We're finding less kelp, which makes sense because they're using sunlight. And then in those shallower depths, you're going to have more kelp, especially with species like fucus and stuff like that. This is very similar. This is by species, however. And you can see, like in the top right here, we had over 14,000 square meters with agarum, with that sieve kelp. And you can see it's in those deeper depths as well. So 30 to 40 feet, there's over 15,000 square meters of agarum that we saw. And if you look at fucus on the bottom right there, you can see that we saw a lot of it at shallow depths. And then that sugar kelp kind of starts peaking at 10 feet and then ends about 40 feet, and then you get into more agarum. So pretty interesting there. Okay. So basically, the purpose of this data, it's super useful as a baseline for where kelp is and what species are where out in Prince William Sound. We can take this data and look at it in the future and see how things have changed through climate change or mariculture or environmental disasters like earthquakes. And we can also see where we found all these kelp species, what depth they're at, what bay they're in. So it's a super cool tool for people who are doing further studies on kelp. We can hand them this and they can go and find exactly what they're looking for. And that's it. I do want to thank Lazy Otter Charters and Babkin Charters, as well as the crew on the Solstice, Fish and Game, Jan Rumble, Martin Schuster. So thank you guys so much. Appreciate it.